Hello everyone. I am Crow, and this video is going to present a new world record for Mechwarrior 4 Mercenaries. This run was done a couple of days ago at this point, and I'm now going to provide commentary, and I'll upload it to YouTube and Twitch. On the right side of the video, you will see the splits from the previous world record holder, Mechwarrior. Compared to her run, I expect this one will gain a little bit of time in missions at the cost of a little bit more time spent customizing mechs outside of missions. Mech customization is a pretty fundamental part of the mech simulation action game genre, and Mechwarrior 4 does not disappoint on that front. Mechwarrior 4 Mercenaries is the more open world sort of game plan where you are presented with a variety of contracts across the galaxy. You can take whichever ones you want. And for a speedrunner, this will often mean not taking any at all. The game has a few waves of missions that it sends your way. We're going to skip the first one entirely, do only one mission of the second, and then jump right into the final game story arc missions, and that will lead to what is considered a game victory. So with all that said, let's go ahead and start up the recording. At the onset of the game, we are going to have to initialize our character. This will include selecting a mercenary faction. We're going with the Northwind Highlanders. Generally speaking, the Highlanders have lower tech, but more cash. In particular, they start with 8 mechs. Most of them are pretty bad, but you can still sell them to get stuff that's better. And so time starts once we hit campaign there. And now we're off. And rather than actually doing any mercenary work, we're just going to cruise the galaxy. This game has a lot of brutal per week maintenance costs as you play the game normally, but if you simply jump from one star system to the next, for whatever reason the maintenance costs don't factor in. So we can abuse this even further by making a bunch of our jumps to Solaris 7, which will subsidize your trip there. So at this point, we have unlocked the second set of missions, which is just done by advancing the overall game calendar enough. And now we're selling a bunch of old stuff in order to make way for the new. We are holding on to a couple of chimeras. We'll use those for the first mission. It's not a great mech, but it's better than taking the time out to make a mech just for this mission and then replacing it with something better later. So I buy a bunch of large pulse lasers, one clan LBX-20, a Awesome, and a Black Knight. The Awesome is being suited up here. I'm giving it a little bit more heat sink and a little bit more speed. I'll move more towards speed and a little bit less towards heat sinks for the mission I'm actually piloting that one. For this mission, though, I'm going to pilot the Black Knight. Black Knight, I'm going to suit up for high speed, short range damage. Small lasers have only 150 meter range, which is very short. And 2 clan LBX-20s. Although I only purchased one, you can just glitch another, just like that. The way that works is you drag the weapon you're trying to clone across a different weapon, let go, and re-click with the correct timing. And that causes the game to believe that you're now dragging another item from your weapon inventory. And by doing all of that, I now have saved myself a little over 1 million C-bills by duplicating that clan LBX-20 I purchased. Now I'm into the mission proper. My allies are going to be trailing behind me a little bit slowly. Chimeras aren't all that fast, and honestly just aren't good in general. But they should be able to keep up if the pilot tries. They won't always. The AI in this game is notoriously difficult. Finds it to be notoriously difficult for them to travel in a straight line in an open field. Why that baffles them while they can get around actual obstacles rather easily is not something I understand. In any case, the overall objective of this mission is to head over to assist Hammerlance at Nav Alpha and then rescue the base that is going to be under attack near Nav Beta. So at Nav Alpha, you'll see there are a lot of helicopters called Night Winds. If you play this game casually, they will likely be the bane of your existence for the first half of the game or so. And also in this area, there's 2 Thanatos and 2 Bushwhacker mechs. Thanatoses come with ECM, so they don't actually pop up on radar until you're within 500 meters or so. My short-range mech here can now dish out quite a bit of damage. The small lasers are extremely weight-efficient damage dealers. Unfortunately, overall, one weakness I have most of the time in this game is just aiming properly. Aiming is a very big part in this game because, as with most mech games, individual components of mechs take damage. So in that case, I noticed that Bushwhacker took most of its damage on its side torso. So I waited until it presented that same side torso again and pummeled that through. And essentially, mechs go down if you either take out the center torso or pummel one of the sides of the torso hard enough that it goes past being destroyed, or pummel one leg similarly to how you would pummel a side torso, or destroy both legs. Any of those things will take out a mech, and generally speaking, we want to focus all of our damage on one component. The center torso is the best choice, but sometimes that doesn't work out, and if I can carefully aim at something else, that's just as good. So now we're going towards the second wave of enemies here. I suppose this is the third. The first wave of enemies was a bunch of tanks that the game does not require you to take out at all. Especially on recruit difficulty, they will go down to just a bunch of helicopters that are friendly that will be coming in. We won't see that happening, but that is what's happening out close to where we started the mission. The patrol boats will die to 2 large pulse laser shots. Condors take 3. And now we're closing in on another set of 2 Bushwhackers and 2 Thanatoses. All of these mechs have the possibility of being dropped as salvage once we've defeated them. And whether or not that happens seems to be just purely random. It doesn't seem to happen more or less often whenever you destroy them by taking out their legs or whatever. So, we're closing in on the end of this mission now. My allies are starting to get in range. They're actually providing a little bit of damage as well. And my LBX AC-20s are doing quite well. The gimmick to that weapon is that the closer you are to your target, the more damage they deal. So at this range here, they're actually not going to do as much. But where they were before, whenever I was within like 100 meters, the damage output is pretty ridiculous. So, with my high-speed mech, with a lot of high-power, short-range weapons, in a fight where I was able to get into close range and spend most of the fight there, I was able to save a fair amount of time compared to the previous run, which used primarily PPCs, which are long-range, high-heat weapons. So, now I'm going to move around for a little bit longer. I need to advance the game clock enough to unlock the third wave of missions. And I will then be aligning myself with the Davion faction as I do that. And the first mission is going to be taking place on a moon. Moons in this game are very heat-efficient areas. If you think about it, that's actually not how it would work, because you're in a vacuum, so there's no air to wick away the heat from the mech. But whatever, they didn't figure that out until later on. in Mechwarrior history. So we'll go ahead and just get some more pilots, some more mechs, and I wound up deciding I'm not going to even try to set up a Daishi at this point. I'm just going to grab 2 Sunders and call it a day. The Daishi is heavier. I will be buying 2 and customizing 2. But for now, I'm just grabbing a couple of Sunders, and then I realized, oh, right, I do still need to grab some equipment, so I do that. And I will suit up one of the Thanatoses that dropped as salvage from the previous mission. I got 4 mechs as salvage, which is pretty good. I've seen as high as 5. I think more is theoretically possible, but absurdly unlikely. 2 Ultra AC-10s, which do have ammo problems, so I add a little bit more ammo to them, plus 1 large pulse laser makes up my configuration for another pretty good mech for my allies to use. Allies are pretty good at using the Black Knight and that Thanatos there. There's also a Sunder in here. Sunders are assault mechs at 90 tons, which is pretty high up, but compared to most mechs of that weight, the Sunder is reasonably fast, but has pretty bad armor. If you're playing in a high difficulty setting, probably don't go with the Sunder. They'll tend to die too quickly, but on recruit difficulty, in a speedrun setting where I want my allies to essentially be high-speed glass cannons to the extent that they can, the Sunder and then also the Loki, those 2 mechs are quite good. I'm not a big fan of like either Atlas or something like that because it's too slow, or the Awesome because it relies too much on long-range, high-burst damage weapons rather than high DPS. So in this mission here, you'll see I'm using 3 large pulse lasers. Large pulse lasers are excellent weapons. They're reasonably heat efficient in terms of how much damage they do for the amount of heat they generate. By having 3 of them, I have exactly enough to one-shot all of these vehicles here. The Condors die in 1 volley, which means I can take out another Condor every second, provided my aiming is good enough to keep up with that and no obstacles get in the way. Unfortunately, my aiming isn't quite that good, but I'm still able to take out quite a few enemies quite quickly. The Demolisher does take some extra damage, though. The gist of this mission is that there are a lot of normal vehicles in the first enemy set, and we do need to knock out a enemy dropship, which is hooked up to these APUs, so each APU you take out reduces a large amount of its health. I thought it was going to go down with that last shot there, wound up having to aim back towards it once again. There are 2 Uziels in the initial set here. Probably the worst thing that can happen in this mission is if the Uziels follow me rather than engaging my allies at the opening of the mission. If they chase towards me, then I pretty much have to take them out, and that takes a lot longer than just trusting my allies to do the same. Now there's a big attack from the Black Cobras. The Black Cobras are a group we were supposed to meet multiple times in the initial set of missions, but we completely skipped all that stuff, so whatever. Colonel Burr here is the leader of the group in the heaviest mech of the bunch, and unfortunately here you're going to see an important game mechanic because my back gets caught on something, I'm not sure what, so I wasn't able to back away from Colonel Burr far enough to avoid taking explosion damage. When a mech is destroyed, it deals a large amount of damage and, more importantly, heat damage to everything around it. I am spending a fair amount of my coolant here. The blue bar just left of the radar shows how much coolant is left, and you can flush that coolant to get a short-term reprieve on your current heat building situation. As heat builds, you will see the interface flicker more and more, and if it overheats for too long, your mech will actually shut down. When taking out Ryokens, I often wind up targeting legs instead of the torso. I find it hard to focus on the center torso or eat either of the two side torsos with that one. So at this point I do repair everything, and then I reset the awesome back to a mode that works better on non-moon areas. The configuration I had on that moon there would overheat very, very quickly. Ideally, I would actually put on some missile weapons like a SRM-6 or something in order to help alleviate a little bit of the damage, a little bit of the heat generation. Probably just run 2 large pulse lasers, but I don't want to spend that much time customizing if I can avoid it. Instead, I want my customizing time to be spent on getting cool new mechs, such as the Daishis I'm going to be purchasing here. I accidentally queued up to sell an LBX-20 and realized, wait a minute, I need that. So, at this point I'm going to purchase 2 Daishis. Daishis are the highest firepower mechs around. They don't move all that fast, but they don't need to. I am, at this point, going to suit up those Daishis. One is going to be a short-range mech, very similar in concept to the Black Knight that I made, but this one's a 100-ton mech and therefore gets to bring way more pain. So this will be 3 LBX-20s. Once again, I do the cloning trick. And then I'm going to, unfortunately, have to deal with armor. The big problem with the Daishi for a speedrunner is that the default armor configuration is bafflingly light. So by spending a little bit of time increasing the amount of armor that the Daishi has, especially on center torso, that will allow me to throw myself into the thick of things and feel confident that I am actually going to have some success there. Because if I die, then, you know, that's super bad. I have to restart the whole mission. That's probably a run over. So, I am also suiting up a second Daishi. This one, instead of getting medium pulse lasers, gets 1 large pulse laser. Instead of a bunch of LBX-20s, it takes a bunch of AC-10s. We'll talk more about that version of the Daishi later. For now, I suddenly realize, oh, right, I needed another pilot. So I just go ahead and buy, hire both of the remaining pilots I'm going to need over the course of the game. I can only put 1 into a mech right now, but we're good. This will be enough to handle this mission, although it winds up getting a little hairy. You can see that all that customization did burn a fair amount of my lead compared to Miyabi's incumbent world record run, but it'll pay off eventually. So at this point, I'm marching on forward. This Daishi has 2 engine upgrades compared to the default, and it does have medium pulse lasers. You have to continuously aim pulse lasers at the target. They also don't have a whole lot of impact on the target. They will generally not recoil at all. So, pulse lasers in general are much more attractive whenever you have a weight advantage over the enemy, and so you can just kind of stand there and fight, compared to if you need to be all squirrely and pop out from a corner, fire a big round of, I don't know, Gauss rifles, PPCs, what have you, and then start hiding again, or start just dodging, or whatever. All those concepts make good sense for a run on a higher difficulty setting, but since we're on recruit difficulty, we can just march straight at the enemy, and as long as we bring the noise hard enough, we will survive long enough to take out the enemies that matter. For this mission here, I'm actually ignoring the helicopters at the back, and in favor of just concentrating at on the mechs. These mechs here actually exist and start charging towards you a lot sooner than the game kind of makes it obvious. They have ECMs mounted, and they kind of start near a river that we're never even going to see here. But by traveling in the direction that I know they're at, they start moving towards me pretty quickly, and we can advance towards the main group of the enemies, which is way off here, away from all waypoints altogether. But we know where they are, so we can just march there and speed things along. Depending on the exact formation I'm seeing from how the enemies are moving in and how my allies are actually joining me, I will sometimes approach this mission from a different perspective. Sometimes I will flank hard to the left. Sometimes I'll flank hard to the right and engage things there. This time what I decided was I would tell my allies to follow me as I flank to the right and then dive towards the back line. This doesn't exactly go to plan. That shot there hitting the arm instead of a torso segment meant that it didn't make any sense for me to keep firing at that awesome. So I move on to this Atlas and then have a similar problem because that shot right there, which was supposed to hit center torso, instead took out a gun rack. So similar problem there where I just didn't do that much damage. So I just have to kind of sit here and take out the rest of the Atlas. I do overheat and shut down here, and that, I think, oddly enough, saves the run. If you look at my center torso right now, it is in bad shape, and it's going to get worse. However, by shutting down at that point, I dropped a fair amount of aggro, which allowed a lot of my allies to start taking damage instead. If I go down, the mission ends, regardless of whether the rest of my allies can handle it. You may notice also that I'm skipping a large number of enemies here. I'm not fighting any of these hell spawns, the medium mechs. I'm not fighting any of the catapults. None of that. In fact, I'm getting ridiculously lucky here with the Atlas just not shooting me, so that's great. But at this point, I am focusing on the few mechs that are actually required to clear the mission, which is the Thanatoses, the Awesomes, and the Atlases. Once you take those down, the rest of the enemies just flee. So that was victory there. Unfortunately, I did take some damage. I do have to do some repairs, and fiddling with the repair stuff is extremely annoying. So I do have to replace a weapon. The game crashes, and I have to reload it, which is even worse. That crash happens if you go from the mech lab to the free market too quickly. If you wait for a little bit, you do actually get to go through just fine, but if you do it too quickly, then too bad. So at this point, I am going to get my last additional mech. It's just going to be a Loki. I could take a Sunder. I like the slightly higher speed of the Loki. It's a lot less durable, but if the Loki goes down, that's fine. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to just mount that replacement LBX-20, and I am going to continue piloting this short-range version of the Daishi a little bit longer. And here we go. Unfortunately, lost a fair amount of time to that crash as well as having to repair, but we're still on good pace for taking the new world record. Although I didn't actually know that during the run. I did not have a stopwatch going. I actually thought at this point that the run was basically dead based off of the crash that occurred. So, in any case, I tell most of my allies to go chasing after some medium mechs at Nav Alpha. This mission is a defense of the mech works. The way the mission's supposed to flow is you spend a lot of time chasing down the medium mechs that are far away from the base. Then they flee, and a bunch of assault mechs appear on the far side of the other section of the base. And you have to go running over that way. It takes forever. By the time you get there, there's 2 waves of assault mechs at the allied base you're trying to defend. And that's not how this is going to go. I have told most of my allies, specifically the ones that move at a reasonable speed, to go chase after the medium mechs for me, and now they've got them to start fleeing. And now the rest of us, which is at this point myself, Beowulf, who's in a Daishi with a bunch of autocannon 10s, and also Blaze, who's in a Sunder. Those ones are the ones that are following me, and I am going to go straight to where I know the next 2 waves of enemies are going to spawn. And I'm just going to spawn camp them, which is kind of weird. The game provides no actual explanation for how these enemies arrive here. They just go from not existing to existing. You're not supposed to see this. You're not supposed to be anywhere near this area. There's no waypoints. You're supposed to be desperately trying to get back to base from Nav Alpha at this point, but instead we're over here fighting a couple of demolishers, which are supposed to be backing up those assault mechs as they arrive. So, pretty soon I'll be reaching the edge of the mission, which is close to where the enemies are going to spawn, and because I'm close to where they are, I'm already in range where my LBX-20s do maximum damage. So, just turn around and blam. That one's already almost dead, although it takes me a little bit longer than it should to finish it off, if I recall. No, that's good enough. So, all of the assault mechs here are actually a lot easier to deal with than the large fight we just had on the previous mission. Even though these are all assault mechs, they're just not very good. We've got 2 Hauptmen and 2 Highlanders for the first wave. Hauptmen just don't have nearly enough armor. Their weaponry is pretty decent, particularly at long range, but that lack of armor is a big deal. And then the Gladiators and the Highlanders both have the same problem, which is that they expend a lot of their weight to have jump jets. Jump jets in Mechwarrior 4 unfortunately just aren't that good. They move too slowly. They generally make it harder for you to hit the enemy while you're jump jetting, while not doing a whole lot to make the enemy have a harder time hitting you, which is kind of the opposite of what you're going for whenever you're selecting a mobility option. So, whatever. These assault mechs, the Highlanders and the Gladiators both wind up being quite easy to take out because they burn so much of their weight on that instead of on either weaponry or armor. So that makes this mission, even though it consists of 12 assault mechs, compared to the 5 of the previous mission, plus a bunch of random other stuff, this mission just is not nearly as difficult. The most frustrating part of this mission actually has to do with the fact that destroying all these mechs does not end the mission. Instead, because the game kind of expects you to take a lot longer to reach the base, the spawn time for a bunch of fighters that are supposed to join the battle is way too slow for how I took the rest of the fight. So at this point, I just have to wait for those guys to appear and then take them down. It is possible to sometimes clear this mission a little bit faster or a little bit slower, but it's not clear to me what the actual trigger is for causing these nightshades to finally start appearing. The purple lasers coming out there are X-pulse lasers. Compared to normal pulse lasers, they fire a little less frequently, do a little more damage, and are a little less heat efficient and have a little bit more range. They're an interesting weapon, and there are cases where you feel good about mounting one large X-pulse laser as your only meaningful energy, heat generating weapon. That is nice because you can just spend 5 tons on it and call it a day as far as your heat generating weapon supplies, but I generally do prefer the normal large pulse laser. Get a lot more damage per second out of it, although you do have to keep aiming at the target. And again, very little knockback on the enemy, so not a lot of defensiveness there. If you want to cause the enemy to have a hard time hitting back, PPC is a lot better. But now I'm going to start the Overlord mission. This is the largest scale mission in the game. I spent a little bit of time making sure that none of my mechs were damaged and need weapons replaced. And then as the mission starts booting, I realize, oh, whoops, I forgot to switch. I'm supposed to switch my Daishi from the one that I have been piloting to the longer range one. So now I'm able to start the mission, and unfortunately that goof cost me another, like, 20-ish seconds. So between that and the crash, there's a lot of time to be saved just by not having dumb stuff happen in the menus. For future runs, I mean. Another thing that can improve this run drastically is just having better aim. Also, latter portion of this mission goes pretty badly too. You'll see what happens here. But for now, this mission is the biggest battle the game has in it. There are so many enemy assault mechs, so many enemy heavy mechs, so many allied heavy and assault mechs joining you in the fight. Lots of helicopters, lots of tanks, just generally speaking, lots of stuff. So in this case, I'm trying to take out the Daishi by hitting what at that point was the far side of the torso, and I actually landed the shot, so that felt pretty good. I am currently in a Daishi myself, very high firepower, but one big disadvantage it does have, which you just saw pop up there, is that the Daishi is very bad at aiming up. A couple of Peregrines did get past me, and so that will be distracting some of my allies. Also a longbow there, which is a very frail assault mech, which mounts generally a large number of LRMs. That's long-range missiles. That mech survived a lot longer than it should have by any sense. So as a result, I do wind up deciding to slow down a little bit here and just kind of take out some of the enemies. If I continue charging forward, I'm just going to die. So I do slow down a little bit. I take out that strong point defense because that will do a lot of damage if I ignore it. And then there's some dragons here. Towards the end of the game, the enemies really start favoring heavy Gauss rifles. That is the biggest weapon that the dragon has, as well as the Victor. And it is a lot of damage all at once, to be sure. And unfortunately, as they've fired, I did wind up taking an unusually large amount of damage on my right leg. Enemies don't usually go for your legs, so I actually reduced the armor on my legs for my usual configurations, just so I can have more armor elsewhere. But in this case, I do lose a leg, which means my max speed is now 20 kph, which is awful. This is a speed run, and now it's more of a speed limp. So, yeah. Unfortunately, at this point, I pretty much just have to keep moving towards the Overlord. The Overlord is a drop ship. There's two drop ships that are shown in the game. One is the Hrothgar, one is the Overlord. The Overlord's the bigger one. Unfortunately, the Overlord does count as a building, and for some reason, in this game, AI is abysmally awful at targeting buildings. I'm not sure why buildings are so hard for them to comprehend hitting. My best guess is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to target a spot in the middle of the building, and they're looking at the building itself as somehow blocking their shot, so they keep trying to wiggle around for a better shot and holding their fire until they do, which, you know, doesn't make any sense, but I can't come up with any other explanation. So at this point, we do just need to make continuous movement progress towards the Overlord, because I cannot trust my allies to take it down. In the meantime, I will take out whatever enemies are in sight.
Enemy detected.
My weapons here are one large pulse laser. I've been using a lot of those. That should require no introduction at this point. And 3 autocannon 10s. This weapon's a very non-obvious choice, but no matter how I kept trying to juggle the numbers, this always came out on top. The autocannon 10 has 600-meter range, which is quite nice. The obvious contender for the obvious other contender for this slot would be a ultra autocannon 10, which would have a range of 500 meters. That 100-meter difference does make a pretty big difference. But more than that, the big problem with the Ultra ACs is that against a target that is moving at all, the Ultra ACs fire their shots in rapid succession with 2 volleys, and the second volley will essentially never, no matter how you're aiming, land on the same enemy component for both the shots. So as long as you are trusting yourself to aim properly, the autocannon 10, the basic one, will wind up dealing about the same DPS for slightly less weight and longer range. So at this point I have taken out the Overlord. I did get a little lucky there in that my allies did not derp around near the Overlord nearly as much as they usually do. At this point, I'm a little frustrated with the repair situation. I wind up having to repair and then sell an Atlas in order to have enough cash for the launching fees to initiate the next mission. So with all that extra shenanigan, I do start this mission a little bit in the red, as it turns out. At this point, again, with all the things that went wrong, I'm thinking this run's dead. I'm just completing the run in order to get practice. Turns out, we wind up being fine, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about how we get there. This mission here reduces you down to just 1 lance, so just 4 mechs, 3 of which are not me. And the overall game plan here is to start, as is required, by knocking out this medium weight lance here. It's 2 bushwhackers, 2 Uziels. This Uziel actually shuts down because it overheated, so that makes it an easy shot to take out all the way. This bushwhacker, unfortunately, bushwhackers are pretty frustrating to consistently hit one torso component. I find their side torsos to be a little bit easier to hit than the front torso, but either way, eventually it gets taken down. I'm trusting my allies to do a lot of stuff here. So I'm trusting them to take out the bushwhacker, and then I'm backtracking to where I started the mission. Once you engage that medium set of mechs, that spawns a bunch of Sunders behind you. So I go back far enough to tell my allies to start fighting the Sunders, and then I myself start charging towards Nav Beta. We need to support all the various dropship locations here. We just rescued 1 Hrothgar, and then there's going to be another one over here. There's also a convoy we have to protect. It'll literally die in 1 shot, so if any enemy accidentally hits one, I just lose the game, which is pretty dumb, but whatever. Anyway, the Sunders that the enemies have, because we're on the lowest difficulty setting, the odds are very good that my allies are going to do just fine here. And since they are Sunders, as I mentioned before, the nice thing about the Sunder for the speedrun is that it's kind of a glass cannon. It moves pretty fast for its weight, has good weaponry, but not much armor. That means my allies can take him down pretty quick. So it all kinds up working out. The enemies near Nav Beta will spawn once all 3 Sunders are taken out, so I do periodically just issue attack your closest target commands to make sure that everything gets taken out. And now I have to fight a bunch of victors. If victors were available earlier on in the game, they would be a serious consideration for what I would put my allies into. The nice thing about the victors, or at least the nicest part of them, and there's a few nice things, but the biggest thing is that it is so hard to consistently hit one part of their body. It's all pretty compact. It's really hard to consistently hit the center torso, and it's not even easy to consistently hit the side torso either. So I wind up wasting a lot of shots spreading out damage here. This is a case where the Ultra AC may actually be better, because I'm spreading out my damage whether I want to or not. In any case, they eventually get taken down. We do have a Hrothgar dropship that is contributing a fair amount of damage, so that makes the victors a little bit quicker to take out. And now we have 2 Vultures and 2 Thanatoses. You may remember the Thanatoses from the beginning of the game, and because they show up so frequently, I feel pretty confident on hitting the right spots on these guys. The Vultures, not so much. They're kind of weird because whenever they turn their torso, they really change their hitboxes a lot. And I have a hard time consistently hitting where I want to as a result. There's also a special component at their nose that you don't want to waste shots taking out. So at this point, I'm trusting my allies to take out the last Thanatos while I make progress towards the next couple of areas that we have to deal with. First, I'm charging towards where I know there's going to be a bunch of fighters coming in. After that, I'm going to move towards the final wave of enemies near Nav Delta. Enemies at Beta are neutralized. One thing I think is worth mentioning at this point is that the Davion missions all have a lot of allies. Whereas if you go the Steiner route, then that will tend to leave you on your own for the most part. And that actually makes me wonder if the Steiner approach may be faster for higher difficulty setting runs. Because on higher difficulty settings, your allies have a lot less that they bring to the table. In particular, the first mission I took here, the one where you're supposed to rescue Hammerlance, rescuing Hammerlance is literally impossible in elite difficulty most of the time whenever you start the run. Even if you were a light mech, you would not arrive at Nav Alpha before Hammerlance was destroyed. So it's a matter of luck if you can save them. Also, the large-scale mission that we had, it's our previous mission, is a huge problem because the prince himself is actually on the battlefield fighting, and if he goes down, which is very likely on elite difficulty, then you just lose. So now we're back to a bunch more mech destruction. These Nova Cats are very poorly put together. They will overheat immediately. So, since they spend most of their time shut down, they're basically just sitting ducks. The Maulers are actually kind of annoying to take out. There's also a Fafnir in the area. And Fafnirs are pretty nice as far as their damage output, but they're also pretty large and easy targets for the Overlord, so they don't usually stay alive long enough for us to see them. We didn't here either. So, going ahead and launching the final mission here. This here is called Checkmate, and we have a couple of kind of mundane tasks we have to take care of first before we get to engage Nandi Steiner and the assault mech command lance that goes along with it. So Nandi herself is in
Target eliminated. Target destroyed.
a Hauptmann, which we've seen before. It's just not very durable. So honestly, probably the least scary mech of the final fight. The rest of the final fight it consists of 4 Daishis, and that is no joke. So, in the meantime, I'm just trying to take as little damage as I can and get to where I need to be as quickly as possible. So I'm charging on forward. It's taking my allies a bizarrely long time to hunt down that Puma. The Puma is a light mech that spends basically all of its weight to support 2 ER PPCs, which is adventurous for a light mech. So it's not very durable, and it's actually pretty easy to hit, so I'm a little surprised it took so long. In any case, I'm now approaching some of the turrets here. One slight drawback of my configuration is that I do get outranged by LRMs as well as by large ER lasers. So, as well as PPCs, those will also outrange me. But for the most part, I'm planning on just charging on forward fast enough that that range disadvantage doesn't really matter too much. So, as I approach Nav Beta, there are 3 threats. A pair of awesomes that come in from the left side. I'll soften those up a bit and trust my allies to take them down. There's also a pair of longbows, which should be coming in on the right side from the section that we were supposed to be climbing up. But instead, I'm just going to be climbing straight up this corner here, which is gradual enough of a slope that I'm allowed to go up it. So I'm just doing that here, using the autocannons to take out the night winds because they are durable enough to survive 1 large pulse laser hit, whereas these stilettos are not. So a kind of weird aspect of this mission is that we have to take out these hangars and the air control station. Once we do, Castle's going to assert that is sufficient to deal with the air threat. Meanwhile, all of the stilettos I missed from before are still flying around and still shooting. So how we have dealt with the air threat is not really something I understand. As for myself, I'm charging on towards Nav Gamma. That is where the Prince is currently engaged in battle with a bunch of assault mechs, and I will help speed that along with some damage of my own. Although, because we are on the lowest difficulty, they would eventually win the fight, even without our intervention. Once again, this is a mission where you will likely just lose without having had any chance of success if you're on the highest difficulty setting, because the Prince will just die before you get there. Once again, the bad vertical aiming capability of the Daishi becomes a pain. To be fair, I did actually manage to aim at the stiletto for a little bit there, and I just didn't pull the trigger at the right moment. So that is on me, but it's also a little bit on the mech too that I had that small of a window of opportunity. Anyway, I do take out this laser turret here. It is not mandatory to do so, but it generally gets in range before the enemy mechs do, and if it's still alive, some of the allied mechs will often get distracted by them. So in the interest of seeing to it that we deal damage to the things that matter, I take it down. In the meantime, my allies did kind of get beaten up because I left them to their own devices against 4 assault mechs. So unfortunately, they have taken some damage already and are unlikely to all survive the final fight against a bunch of Daishis. But because they got tied up in that battle before, that does improve their positioning on the map, because they're currently trying to get to where I am, but because they're lagging so far behind, they're now pretty close to where all those daishis that need to be destroyed just spawned. So I just tell my allies to start shooting down one of the daishis, and I start moving back towards that myself. There are various ramps you can use to try to get up. I choose to just take this kind of gradual hill here in order to get up. It's closest to Nav Gamma, where I just did some fighting. There's also a much more intended ramp over towards the right side. I'm skipping that because, well, for one, that's where my allies are, and for two, I'm already closer to here. Speaking of my allies, you can tell by the coloration of their icons on the upper left portion of the screen that they're not doing that well. So I am going to go ahead and take out this Daishi. Recall that at this point, I was thinking this run was dead. So my motivation to make sure all of my shots landed exactly where I wanted them to be was a little less than it probably should have been. So do expect a little bit of wasted shots. At this point, there's only one Daishi left. Although my allies went down, they took most of the enemies with them. So this is actually enough damage that I shouldn't have been chasing after this Daishi. I should have just trusted that Nandi Steiner would be spawning at this point. And in fact, it did. So at this point, I just need to take out center torso, which takes me a bit longer than it should because, again, I'm not really focusing that hard on aiming exactly correctly because I didn't realize how close I was to actually getting the record. So in any case, just a couple more shots here, and we're done. Time happens once the fade to the final cutscene begins, which is not yet. It is now. Okay. So I think I was a couple tenths of a second late on starting the timer at the beginning, so I do believe this is a 49-minute, 25-second run and not 24.8 or whatever's shown here. But the point is, this is a new record. Also, check out what happened to this cutscene. Ah, my computer's gaining sentience. It's becoming self-aware. All right. So there you have it. That is Mechwarrior for Mercenaries in 49 minutes, 25 seconds. This is a sizable improvement from the previous run, but obviously can be improved from here. Obvious low-hanging fruits include not having a crash, not having to reload a mission. Those are pretty obvious. Also, just better aiming in general, but especially in the last mission. Just doing a little bit better overall throughout is an improvement. Every instance of needing to do repairs costs a lot of time. That's a big takeaway I had from doing some grinding of this game up to this point. So I would be very interested in seeing a player that's a bit better at the execution of this game pick up some of the improved strategies that I'm leaning on heavily here to gain my advantages. So with both good strategy and good aiming and somewhat better menu execution, I think this run can be a lot faster than this. Sub 48 is, I am quite certain, possible. Although it would certainly be difficult. Below that, I'm not sure. Some more strategy improvements might be required. So, in any case, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And you can check out my Twitch channel. The channel name is Crow. That's just the word crow with a couple eyes decorating it on either side. And you can see various speed runs and challenge runs, and sometimes I play my randomizer there, all sorts of stuff like that for various retro games, ranging from strategy to role-playing games to occasionally action stuff like this. So if any of that interests you, if you enjoy my commentary, I do try to provide this commentary anytime I do live streaming. This run here was done offline just because this game genre requires more constant focus from me. So thanks for watching. Take care.